And we're live. We're live, guys. Welcome to another episode of Good Morning Liberty. My name is Michael Boldin. Happy Monday morning. It is September the 24th, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast. We're broadcasting here from a spare bedroom, my home office here in downtown Los Angeles. So good morning to you. I know a lot of people who are tuning in. It's the afternoon or even in the evening when you're watching. So whatever time of the day it is, I hope you're having a wonderful start to the week. Hi to Donovan. Hi to EHP Training and everybody else watching. I really appreciate you being here with me today. Hope you had a really good weekend. Of course, a lot of interesting things always happening. Donovan is saying, hey, I get to watch live. I was actually mentioning to my friend Robert Scott Bell, who does a daily Sunday through Friday radio show that he actually started doing on YouTube, gave me part of the inspiration to start doing this show as well, is that I actually... Maybe I shouldn't tell my friend this, but the only time I watch is when I'm watching live. So for those of you who watch the archives, I should be ashamed of that. But there's something about it. I like the interaction, and I'm really grateful, even though YouTube, I think, politically has a lot of garbage that they really want to rise to the top, and they're probably not in line with my views personally. I'm grateful for the platform, and I hope that others can move in. I know a BitChute, we've been posting regularly there and on Reel.video. I hope one of these platforms, I know there's DTube, I haven't gotten there yet, and DLive, but I'd like to see some live streaming, good mobile apps, and I think the more that we use those platforms, the more that we'll see real competition here on YouTube. Hey to Justin as well. Of course, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you guys being here with me. Now, today I want to talk about, as you see in the title, I'm talking about the empire ramps up war and threats of more. And I think that's especially interesting in light of the fact that last week, Wednesday, we did a show dedicated to George Washington's farewell speech. And one of the most famous things that he talked about was how to deal with foreign policy in other nations. What he advised is the proper course forward for security and for liberty. And one of the most interesting things that he pointed out was cherish the public credit. And that one really sticks with me. Cherish the public credit if you believe. Now, it didn't just say cherish the public credit because you want to be like, economically smart, but he was talking about it in line or in light of security and liberty. If you want to be safe, you shouldn't be spending a ton. And if you want to be free, you shouldn't be spending a ton. And as Jefferson put it, if you do this, you're swindling people. So it is very dangerous to have a country that is so far in debt. And we're talking about 21 plus trillion, close to 22 trillion, and that's really bad. I know that there's been some spending bills that are moving forward. So that's all bad news. A lot of it does go into foreign policy, to propping up dictators, to trying to influence the actions of other countries. And, our own house isn't clean, and I think that's why it's so important. The founders focused very heavily in the debates and in the structure of government on trying to restrict the ability of the federal government to engage in war, because they wanted to get away from the constant war, the battles between the kings and queens of Europe, and they recognized the better way to be secure and free was to get away from that system. And I think, if anything, the U.S. has been in that system for way too long. So let's talk about threats of war and war ramping up and lies about them that I think lead to a bunch of other bad things. Oh, and I shouldn't forget, it's Monday, so I'm just getting started. I got my coffee here. So don't forget to smash the likes. It's a big deal. Smash that like. I know at least one person had mentioned to us that they're hitting the like and then coming back later and checking and noticing that it's not showing as liked. So if you notice that as well, please let us know in the comments or shoot us an email over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. But smash those likes, because doing so helps us spread the word. It triggers the algorithm. Make sure you leave some comments here, either in the live stream or in the archives. And share the video widely. The more views that we get, the more that we reach new people, the more that maybe someone opens an eye. When I started the 10th Amendment Center back in 2006, I registered the domain in summer of 2006. My thought was, I'm sick and tired of basically everything. And I learned this pretty much from Harry Brown. who's a great writer who passed away. Look into him, Browne. Harry Browne would repeatedly talk about on his radio show and in his books and his writings and speeches, he would talk about how everything that government promises is either a total lie, they're not doing what they promised they said they would do, or if they do it, it just costs so much more. And so my goal was just to reach a couple of people, one person, two people, with the knowledge that government is always lying to us some way, either about cost or what they're going to do. And here we are 12 plus years later, and certainly we've reached a lot of people, millions, I would say. And so every single person that we reach, I think, is important to me, and I hope important to you too, because that's what it's going to take to stand up for the Constitution and liberty. But let's get to the news today. So I want to cover a number of things that have happened over the last few days and that have been kind of building for a while. The first one here is that the U.S. is preparing actions in the coming days against Venezuela, says the big liar and big spyer Mike Pompeo to Fox News. Let's read through this. The United States is preparing a series of actions in the coming days to increase pressure on the Venezuelan government, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Fox News on Friday. You'll see in the coming days a series of actions that continue to increase the pressure level against the Venezuelan leadership, folks, who are working directly against the best interests of the Venezuelan people, Pompeo said. We're determined to ensure that the Venezuelan people get their way. Now, Venezuela is a shit show. I mean, it is crumbling. Here is a proud nation, probably a very good people. I think most average people are good people when you get down to it. In our heart, we're all good people. And they're just being destroyed. They're put into an untenable situation. But is the best thing for the... I mean... Here at the same time, the United States is in an untenable situation with $21 trillion in debt. If we don't think that this type of thing can happen here, hyperinflation, the Federal Reserve has been inflating the currency. I've seen where some experts say that it's worth about 4 cents on the dollar in comparison to when the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, an extremely bad year, of course. So isn't it a bit hypocritical for the country that spies on everyone, that runs up the largest deficits and debts in history of the globe, that violates its own governing document almost constantly, is telling another country what to do that's right and wrong? I mean, clearly Venezuela is a mess. But in a moral position, the U.S. has no moral high ground to be bossing anybody around, and that's my view on that. But I think it's very dangerous to be continually meddling in other people's affairs. Of course, this costs more money, it costs more resources, it costs more lives. If they're going to get into a military action, there were reports in recent months that the president had been really agitating for an actual invasion against Venezuela. Maybe it wasn't the president. It was either the president or a top cabinet official. Someone in the administration was pushing for an invasion of another country. And that's the last thing that the United States needs. That's the last thing our Constitution and liberty need. But it isn't just Venezuela. Over in China, the U.S. is pressuring China with sanctions because they made a business deal to buy military hardware from Russia. So China said Friday it was, quote, outraged over U.S. economic sanctions against the Chinese military agency and its director over the purchase of Russian fighter jets and surface-to-air military equipment, and demanded the U.S. cancel the measure. China purchased weapons from Russia. There was a law passed, I think in 2017, bipartisan support, signed by the president, to strike back against Russia for meddling in the elections. I don't really know whether they did or didn't. I know that if anybody on earth has meddled in more elections, it's probably the United States government. The U.S. meddles in all kinds of elections. They've overthrown governments. They prop up dictators. If you just look at its support of Saudi Arabia, this is insane. The Ukraine situation, Egypt, elsewhere, the Shah of Iran. You could just go through the history or just listen to the Scott Horton show at scotthorton.org, I believe. And you'll learn all kinds of history of how the U.S. government has involved itself in other countries' affairs. Here we're talking about just the article before here, we're talking about how the U.S. wants to pressure. Now, maybe that's not meddling in elections, but it's meddling in the decision. Now, let's say this guy Maduro and Chavez before him, maybe they were elected by a popular vote. A lot of people would say that, oh, okay, this is a sham. They probably won by 90-some%. This is obviously garbage, just like Saddam Hussein. But then again, maybe the people in Venezuela are as or more economically ignorant as many people in the United States. We saw a poll last week that showed that 70% of the United States general population, 50% of Republicans, 70% total support single-payer, Medicare for all, single-payer health care. So that shows that people here are economic idiots in large numbers. So it's not that surprising that in other countries that have been built on socialism for a long time, people really have a belief that this socialism garbage is okay. So the U.S. has been meddling. So they want to pressure Russia. So instead of, I know they have some kind of sanctions on Russia, but now they're trying to sanction and pressure other people who want to do business with Russia. Not necessarily saying that China and Russia doing business, buying military equipment from each other is a positive or a negative, but the U.S. is now putting sanctions on China. Well, sanctions are an act of war. John Adams talked about years ago how merely just withdrawing from a treaty was considered an act of war. So blocking people from economic activity is an act of war. It always has been, at least according to the founding generation. So they are threatening China pretty aggressively here. China's purchase of the weapons from Borano Export, I don't know how to say it, Russia's main arms exporter, violated a 2017 law, the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, intending to punish the government of Vladimir Putin for interfering in U.S. elections and other activities. So they're punishing Russia somehow. I mean, the mentality here, I wish I had a good analogy, is, I don't know, maybe if you're thinking like a parent, but I don't want to make it like a parent-child relationship between the U.S. and Russia and U.S. and China. But think about like your kids. Like you don't want your kids to do something, so you have authority to punish the neighbors who hang out with your kids. I mean, this is just not the right approach, because then what you're doing is you're getting other countries to line up against you. If you want to address Russia, address Russia. Personally, I believe in, again, the Washingtonian approach, which is peace and commerce with everyone. And Jefferson saying entangling alliances with none. Now, the follow-up report on this comes from Jason Ditz over at antiwar.com. And he says, anger over Friday's imposition of U.S. sanctions on a China military agency. The Chinese Defense Ministry announced that they have recalled Navy Chief Shen Jinlong from the U.S. and indefinitely postponed planned talks that were supposed to happen next week. Dakota, you're absolutely right. Would you expect less from us? Scouse Jack, slap your friend for talking to your ex. And yeah, a lot of people have that mentality. They're misdirecting the source of who they're angry at. Like, let's say your partner is cheating on you. A lot of people get mad at the person who cheated rather than the partner or themselves. They're looking to the wrong direction, the wrong solutions. EHP training, Ron Paul agrees with sanctions being an act of war. Yes, I've heard him say this numerous times. And if you aren't watching his show, which is at 9 a.m. Pacific time, Ron Paul Liberty Report here on YouTube, it is really a wealth of information. Every Friday they do mostly an economic focused program, and it's really, really good stuff. So, of course, what's going to happen? You're basically getting China pissed off at you too, and now they're canceling military talks. Now, I have talked positively, probably in the first few weeks of the show, talking about how I thought it was good that the Trump administration was meeting with North Korea. Now, there's a lot of open end on where that's going. I thought this was so far, and I'm not a fan of a lot of the things that the Trump administration has done. The spying has been expanded, the NSA spying with a secret court. I mean, this country shouldn't have secret courts. That's what the FISA or FISC courts, Foreign Intelligence Court. They expanded this. They extended it. Gun control enforcement has gone up over the Obama administration. There's almost $22 trillion in debt. Like, the national debt is insanely high. They're spending like crazy. The number of bombs being dropped are ramping up. Trump is in favor of asset forfeiture. There's a lot of things to say that have nothing that they're doing that are totally anti-constitutional. But that, I don't want to be like one of these resistance losers who just oppose someone because they're opposing that person. Because what you end up with that is you have the former anti-war movement who just, I think a lot of people, they really oppose the individual. And so then they find different attack vectors on how to oppose them. So while Bush was in office, there's a huge anti-war movement. People marching in the streets by the tens and hundreds of thousands, if you make it cumulative, on a single day. Hundreds of thousands of people over and over and over for a number of years. But as soon as Obama gets in and he has war against more countries and more bombs dropped than George Bush, all of a sudden this dissipates. It's gone because they really aren't anti-war. So I don't want to be that person. And maybe I think we all have a propensity at some time. We find some political leader that we don't like, and we just want to oppose them just because they're the bad guy. But, if the bad guy does something good, praise them for it. And Trump, I think, did something excellent by going to meet with North Korea. I don't even care what the motivations are. He went to do something that no one has ever done. Shake hands with someone. And it's always better to shake hands and have conversations in foreign policy if we're following the advice of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and many other of the founders. Have conversations with people. We can't force them to be more free. We can lead by example and encourage people to come here who believe in freedom and go through the process, etc., and be part of that. But we can't force them to be free. And what's the worst way to encourage people to be free is by ignoring them or threatening them. They're going to harden their mentality and look at everything that you do as being you're the bad guy. So the type of sanctions that are happening on China because we're opposed to, when I say we, I shouldn't necessarily say that, because the U.S. government is opposed to what's going on with Russia. Now you're basically hardening an ally against you. You're making them angry. And instead of having what Trump did with North Korea, which is having conversations with a longtime enemy, always doing military exercises, threatening nuclear war back and forth, crazy talk that could lead to something really bad. Instead of having that conversation, well, of course, what's China going to do? Hey, look, man, you're punishing us for making a purchase from someone other than you. Look, your problem is with Russia is your problem with Russia. It is not with us. So whether the Chinese are good or bad is another story. All governments are garbage when you really get down to it. All governments, national, federal, state, local, all of them are bad, and they have a propensity to do bad things. The question is how do you want to play that chessboard? Do you want to get more governments that are lined up against you to do more bad things? And this is not a good policy, in my view. And of course, Pompeo, I think, is total garbage. This is a guy that doesn't have any inclination towards the U.S. Constitution. He's totally in favor of mass warrantless surveillance. This is, to me, following simple things like the Fourth Amendment or the Second Amendment. These are basically lines in the sand on whether someone should be trusted or not. And then when you get down to Pompeo's views on foreign policy now as Secretary of the State, he's very aggressive when it comes to kind of a neocon approach to foreign policy, which is totally different than the founders. And then, of course, now here's this report, Harrison, who's a writer at the American Conservative, republished over at the antiwar.com website. And he says, Mike Pompeo's certification earlier this month that the Saudi coalition was working to reduce harm to civilians in Yemen was an obvious sham. According to a new report in the Wall Street Journal, Pompeo made the decision to lie for the Saudis and Emiratis because he feared it would hurt arms sales. Now, if you remember, if you watched the show, I talked about the signing of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, the funding bill for 2019. This massive, almost $1 trillion funding bill. And they wanted to have some very modest restrictions on funding for the war in Yemen. Rarely positive thing from Congress. I mean, not even close to what they should do, but a very small restriction. Now, President Trump signed a really long signing statement with it saying he was going to ignore this and a number of other things. Now, of course, Obama did the same thing, and conservatives hated that, and I didn't see any outrage, vice versa. Like, it just, the outrage switched around. It was the left that was outraged about the Trump administration's signing statement that weren't while Obama was in office, and vice versa. It is just absurd. But one of those things was a certification that they were basically, that the Saudis were not going to bomb civilians. Seems pretty normal. And if the U.S. was providing funding, they wouldn't if they continued to kill innocent people, because a lot of people are getting slaughtered in Yemen in this proxy war by the Saudi Arabian government. And they needed to have some certification. So even though the Trump administration said that they were going to ignore this, it looks like Pompeo decided to follow through on it, but instead he just lied. Mike Pompeo overruled concerns from most of the State Department specialists involved in the debate who were worried about the rising civilian death toll in Yemen. Those who objected included specialists in the region and in military affairs. He sided with his legislative affairs team after they argued that suspending support could undercut plans to sell more than 120,000 precision-guided missiles to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. According to a classified State Department memo and people familiar with the debate. Cutting off refueling to the coalition likely would make it extremely difficult. So they were saying if Saudi Arabia was not taking specific actions to avoid bombing civilian areas, the U.S. would stop providing refueling support. And Pompeo said, oh, yeah, they're good to go. But then we find out through this memo released that this was just nonsense. He was just concerned about arms sales. Mind you, he's also part of the process, a part of the team that wants to restrict China from buying arms from Russia. So maybe this whole thing is just a profit thing. I don't know. But it seems pretty crazy when you look at it all together. Cutting off, and this is how Daniel reports it, cutting off refueling to the coalition likely would make it extremely difficult to sell more weapons to the Saudis. But that is not a good reason to ignore evidence and expert advice and then lie to Congress. I mean, if you or I lied to Congress, if you or I lied to a cop in just a random stop, we probably get charged with something for that. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure we would get charged with something. So we're not allowed to lie to them, but they can lie to us all they want with impunity. And it's unfortunate that this is happening. But speaking of lies, check out this one from the ACLU. This one, ACLU, whom my organization, 10th Amendment Center, has worked with on a number of things, on surveillance. They've been actually pretty good on war powers under the Constitution. I've actually talked with their headquarters and actually had conversations where they talked about how it's Congress's requirement to declare war, and none has done this since the 40s, so they've actually got a good perspective on this. But they very much switched to be more of a political organization. I mean, they've never been good on the right to keep and bear arms. They're not good on national health care, but they're switching into this kind of partisan hackery that we see from other think tanks instead of like just defending people's rights in certain areas. And here's this tweet from over the weekend. Obama didn't do enough to curtail America's drones. Now look how many people this goes to. 1.52 million people, which is pretty huge on Twitter. It's not the Trump level, but it is huge. Obama didn't do enough to curtail America's drones, and expansion under Trump could have devastating consequences. What are we getting from this message? Barack Obama curtailed the drone wars. This is a big lie. And because Obama was just soft on cutting back, the Trump administration, who is the real bad guy, is going to make things worse. Now, this is a total complete piece of propaganda garbage. And ACLU is getting incredibly bad on this. I called them out in a tweet on Twitter. I don't have a lot of personal followers. I only started doing this recently. I've had the account for a long time, but I only started tweeting more recently. But it really irritates me that they can't just be honest. Like, okay, be a leftist, but be honest about these things. To claim that Trump is bad, but he isn't just building up on what was left to him, is total propaganda, and it leads people to the wrong solution, which is support more progressives voting, vote for more candidates, which do the bad things. So here's the deal. Obama ramped up drone warfare significantly. And at the very end of his administration, he cut back on that a little bit as far as what the CIA could do independently. But if you go from point A here, let's say if you're looking at a chart, and you end up here, and then you cut back to here, you didn't really cut back. So to say that Obama wasn't curtailing is just propaganda. It's assuming that Obama was a good guy. Once again, they took the same position with him on marijuana enforcement. Oh, the Trump administration is overturning Obama's great work on supporting the 10th Amendment and states' rights on marijuana enforcement, and the Trump administration's bad, but Obama isn't. And the fact of the matter is, in just Obama's first term, he spent more on enforcement measures and conducted more federal raids in violation of the 10th Amendment than George Bush and Bill Clinton combined in 3 terms. One term was worse than 3 terms. So then the ACLU presents this message, and a lot of people do, that Obama was the good guy. He backed off on federal enforcement, and that Trump and Sessions are the bad guys. When the real story is that it just keeps getting worse, and the current administration always uses the previous administration's level of power as a floor rather than a ceiling. Now, we have to actually look at some numbers, and it's possible that the Trump administration is actually better, even though Jeff Sessions has a lot of really bad rhetoric. We don't really know the numbers yet. So we're looking into this right now. We have someone who's doing some research on this right now. And when we get that information, we'll report back. But Obama was the worst on marijuana enforcement in modern times. But the ACLU wants the propaganda that he was the good guy, because this sounds good to progressives, to Democrats and the left. Oh, Obama was the good guy. Trump's the bad guy. Now, let's say even Trump is the bad guy on this, but Obama was as well. And ACLU is misdirecting people. The same thing on this drone warfare. And there's linking to this article by Brett Max Kaufman over at The Guardian, which is a huge publication. Obama didn't do enough to curtail America's drones. Now expansion under Trump could have devastating consequences. The real subtitle should be Obama ramped up the drone warfare, and the new president is taking that and running with it. I don't know the numbers on what Trump is doing on drone warfare, but we know that in 2017, he dropped more than 4 times the amount of bombs per year than what Obama did. So that in the number of bombs being dropped, maybe it's a lot by drones, maybe not, but we got the numbers from Air Force Central Command. Taco salad is, I mean, this is the mentality of most people. It's okay when our guy does it, of course. That's the real, I think that to me is the danger, because if it's always okay when your guy does it, then the next guy's going to do it even more. And then your guy's going to come in and do it even more, but then you're going to be okay with it. So every chance they get, it's a rotation of sanctioning these type of unconstitutional, illegal, or immoral actions. So in this report, they say, toward the end of the Obama administration, the president moderately circumcised the agency's role in executing lethal strikes abroad, in part to increase public transparency. But this is the important stat, and this is what I'm getting to. The Bush administration carried out roughly 50 attacks in 2 terms, 8 years, that killed around 500 people. Under Obama, the government conducted more than 500, 10 times increase, that killed more than 3,000, a 6 times increase. So most people, in all honesty, and it's very unfortunate, I think this is part of the social media world, most people don't read. They read headlines, they read subheadlines or subtitles, and maybe a paragraph or 2. I think the statistics that I've seen is about 67% of people never scroll. So if you're looking at an article like I am here, you're going to read to about the end of this yellow. You're not going to scroll down. Most people, and they're not going to see. So most people are going to read and talk about how, learn how the Obama administration moderately cut back on drone warfare, but not before they learn that they already increased the number of attacks by 10. So the blame is in the wrong place, and that creates a real problem. To me, the ACLU and the other organizations and publications that talk like this, what they're doing is they're misdirecting people in the wrong solution. If the problem is both teams are violating the Constitution and ramping things up on most things all the time, then the solution isn't Team A or Team B. But to them, they're saying, oh, Team A is trying, but they're just not doing enough. We just got to get a better version of that or more of those people to overcome. And that's really a problem. I think we'll probably see a lot of the same in the other direction. But I haven't looked as closely as I have on the fake leftists. But that leads me to our quote of the day. Again, as I was talking about last week on the 19th, we had the Washington's farewell address. And we talked about how he should, cherishing the public credit, about you shouldn't ignore violations of the Constitution, even if you like the result or if it's a small violation, because over time, eventually those violations become the norm. But of course, what he is almost primarily known for is his talks about unity and, of course, foreign policy. And he talks about having no permanent antipathies towards particular nations or love. Don't align with anybody permanently. He says the great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. And this was the juicy one. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Lead by example. Be the good guys. Follow the Constitution. Make the country the most free on earth. And once you're there, then you encourage people to join us. Escape your oppressors. That's the whole idea. Now, it's hard to do that when you're not the freest country on earth, or like if you're grading on a bell curve, everybody's bad, and you just keep getting worse. So observe good faith and justice towards all nations, cultivate peace and harmony with all. I know I keep hammering this George Washington speech, and I know he was bad on a lot of stuff, but on this advice was incredibly sound, and I think it's timeless. So that's what I have to cover today. I think it's very important that we talk about some foreign policy from time to time. I am not an expert on this at all, but I do try to keep on top of what's going on. I read antiwar.com. I listen to the Scott Horton Show as a podcast. The Ron Paul Liberty Report covers foreign policy pretty regularly. I think it's essential. The founders made this a big part of their discussion. It was a big part of their motivation. And I think it's incumbent upon us to do the same, even if it's something that we're not, there's so many things going on, so many moving parts to understand what's going on in Yemen. It's a proxy war, or in Afghanistan, been in war there for years and years and years, or Iran, where they've overthrown one government and then you have a radical one come in. And it's hard to really figure out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And I think the best solution in almost every situation is stop meddling in other people's affairs. At least don't meddle until you've got your own affairs cleaned up. And this country is so far from that, it's almost laughable. It's sad and painful. But I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Donovan, EHP, Dakota, Scouse Jack, Taco Salad, everybody who's been watching that's not commenting, or if you're watching a little bit later in the archives, I hope you're learning something from this. I am slowly but surely learning more and more about what's going on in current events on foreign policy. I want to try to tie it back in towards this foreign policy that was recommended for us from the founders. And I think that will be a really good solution for us economically and towards our liberty. That is really, really important. So thank you so much for being here with me today. If you've enjoyed the show or you found it interesting, please remember to smash the likes. It does help us get the word out. Leave some comments later. Don't hesitate to shoot me an email over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Either myself or someone else will check that and take a look at it later if you've got some ideas on what we should cover in the future. And we'll be back on Wednesday and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. I hope you have a great Monday. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.